10th, 2024 Utility Policy Committee meeting to order. Next item is to set the agenda. Any additions or changes, corrections? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
So move. Support.
There's a motion by David Anderson, support by Jim Escamilla to set the agenda as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is introduction and guests. I think we have a full board today, including one. Steve is sitting here as a staff member this morning for one of the items on the agenda. And quickly go through, I guess there's sure.
Mark Elliott, Tim Hudson with the Regional Commission.
Brian Vilmont, Brandon Newhoff.
Aaron Grog, Gull Lake Sewer and Water Authority.
Christina Hutchings, Ross Township.
And then online, members from Stantec. And
Danica Katz from Stantec.
Sherry Bell from Oshtemo.
Good morning.
And several members included. Next item is acceptance of the September 12th, 2024 draft minutes. I do have one change, and that is that Mark Elliott was an alternate and not voting at the last meeting. And then the rest of the members present is correct.
One other change, it's Derek Knopfs, N-O-F-F-S, from Consumers Energy, not Knopfs.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
Support.
Motion by Tom Lee, support by Jeff Chamberlain to accept the minutes with those two corrections. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Any public comment this morning? First in person, anyone wishing to address the board? Anyone online wishing to address the CPC? Hearing none, we will continue with item 6, the unfinished business, the 2025 water rates, and we have Stantec here for discussion and possibly action.
Good morning, everyone. This is Jim Behrman from Stantec. We have completed our analysis on the water rate study or rates to go into effect January 1 of 2025, and have submitted an executive summary, which I believe UPC has a copy of. We had multiple discussions and meetings with James Baker, city staff, Steve Vincenzi, as well as Peter Daphner. You have a proposal, a recommendation from Stantec to increase water rates effective January 1, 2025 in the amount of 5%.
I would report in. I met with on Zoom with Mr. Baker and his team and Stantec in the preliminary rate calculation process, and we made some tweaks at that point in time to make sure that we were following the utility financial policy. And then we met subsequently after the final data was provided to Stantec and met with James, Stantec team, James's team, and went through the process. And Steve was very important to be involved in that process as well, and to make sure that coverage was met and the other goals of the utility financial policy were met. And the results are in this summary. And I just asked that we put together a few pages that support or explain the necessity for this rate change. And that's this document. And I would just wanted to point out a couple highlights. If you take a look at the first page, the first graph on the left, this is the reserve, and the black line is the 9 months of operating expenses, and the reserve is above that line currently, and planned to come down over a period of 5 years to be the goal in the projection. And I wanted to point out, and Steve, by all means, jump in, that there's a very substantial project coming in the future. That project will require cash funding for expenses and subsequently reimbursement with bond proceeds. So those proceeds are not provided to the city until you actually spend the dollars. Unlike other bonds where you issue the bond, you get the money up front. And the projection is in 2030, the reserve would meet the 9 months of operating expenses. But before that date, the current coverage is providing cash flow in excess of that policy. But those excess cash dollars will be used to cash fund capital into the future to the tune of, I believe it's 33 or 35% of capital in the future will be cash funded and not debt funded. And if you take a look at the next page, or I would point out the orange at the top is that coverage ratio, and the projection shows it drops slightly below the 1.4 times. Covenants require 1.2 times, so we have a margin of error there. And if you take a look at the next page, it's just...
The bond covenants
Yes,
require
yes,
that.
yes.
The policy requires more.
The policy requires 1.4 and the covenants, I believe, are 1.2 times. But we never want to not exceed the covenants, for sure.
I'll just add in there, when we talk with the bond rating agencies, they're always rating us based on 1.4. So 1.4 is kind of their line that if we start dipping below that, they start to get worried. If we're above that, they feel pretty good about where we're at.
The second page of this document provides just the assumptions. The third page provides what are the projected inflationary increases on the cost of labor and chemicals and things of that nature. And I thought that the fourth page was important to be included, as it identifies to what extent are we going to be revenue funding of capital. So revenue funding of capital in 2025 projected at $7.5 million, 2026, $11 million, 2027, $10 million, et cetera, so that the bond coverage ratio is resulting in cash, which will be available to fund your capital into the future. So if you meet your covenants, theoretically, you're bringing in cash in excess of what the bond debt service is, and that cash is going to be used for capital at the discretion of the city for a substantial $100+ million project to improve the water system. And I had a chance to look through everything. James did, Steve. We had great discussions, met several times with Stantec. And the results of that process is a proposed rate increase of 5% for water customers. And again, I haven't said it yet. This is very much driven by capital. So if you have a capital plan that requires a lot of capital, rate increases result. Also inflation. You have 4% wage increase, you're gonna need to cover that at a minimum.
Thank you.
I would propose that the UPC propose to the city a 5% rate increase in accordance with the rate calculation provided by Stantec.
A motion?
Yes.
I support that.
There's a motion by Peter to recommend a 5% rate increase per the recommendation from Stantec to the city of Kalamazoo, and there's a second by Tom Wheat. Further discussion.
Just one point. I know in the years past, we had looked at having higher than 5% increases for what this coming year would be. So actually, so this is good news. Quite good news. So maybe, I know I was talking about some of the factors that kind of went into kind of why we're at 5% right now, when a couple of years ago, we were projecting maybe at like around 10%. But we've had some changes in some of the programs that have actually worked to the benefit of kind of the long-term, the rate structure.
Yeah, so I mean, I think a couple of things that kind of play into that are, one, the DWRF bonding with the significantly lower rates and principal forgiveness has been a factor. Two, our capital plan has kind of gotten to more of a maturity point. You know, it's not really shown on the Stantec model here, but 2023 was really the first year we generated a significant amount of operating cash flow, which is why you see those reserves grow. So now we're in a phase where previously we could not afford to spend a significant amount of operating cash or revenue or rate cash on capital. Now we're entering that phase of just to meet that bond covenant of 1.4, it's generating a lot of capital, or cash. So being able to use that to offset the capital plan is ultimately what's a big factor in keeping this rate where it is today, compared to where we were a few years ago. You know, I know we're not talking about wastewater, but a lot of people at the same table. We're getting to that maturity level with wastewater in the next couple of years as well, but we're not there yet. So as we look at those rates, it's gonna be kind of the same story, just a few years behind.
During the final get-together with the group, we had an opportunity to take a look at what the bonding interest rate was, and it was very interesting to see 1% change in the rate for bonding made a substantial change in what the rate needed to be for water. So the DWSRF funding is at a very low interest rate, which very much affected this, or the ability to keep the rate increased at a reasonable level.
And then the cash funding going forward, I would think.
Yeah, that just
also
reduces your
affected, yeah.
future costs, for sure.
So one other item of discussion is that somebody from the UPC needs to go to the city commission when this is presented. What do you have when that is?
So we're gonna give a presentation to our committee of the whole on November 12th. And then we'll have first reading on November 18th and on second reading on December 2nd.
So the 18th would be the appropriate time to be there?
I think that's open for discussion. The meeting on the 12th will introduce the rate. So that could be a great time to interact with the city commission and support that rate, but it won't be in ordinance format until the 18th and then ultimately on the 2nd.
This is Jim Behrman from Stantec. If I may interject with a couple other quick points in addition to what Peter and James have already indicated. In the analysis, we know the city obviously has a very robust capital improvement program. The execution percentage, however, of that capital improvement plan is set at 75%. Very similar to what we did in last year's analysis. And then the second point I'd like to make is, yes, the recommendation is a 5% overall increase. We are finalizing our cost of service analysis in the next week to 2 weeks. now that we've gotten through this recommendation, to determine if any rate class subsidies exist where there's a misalignment of revenues collected and costs incurred. We did that analysis with last year's study, and there was no significant issues. We don't expect that to change significantly, but we'll have that analysis in a week or two. And what I'm suggesting is, yes, it's a 5% overall increase, but perhaps it may indicate a need for something slightly different than the 5% for the residential customers or the commercial customers, et cetera. I don't anticipate that to happen, but until we complete the updated analysis, I just wanted to let you know of that possibility.
So if there's a change in the recommendation, then I think it comes back here.
It wouldn't be
I
a,
don't believe there'll be a,
it wouldn't be a change in the overall rate, it may be a change in the rate between customers, I believe.
yes.
And I don't believe that this identifies a rate between customers.
Okay,
So I think we would not need to do such a thing, but
okay.
we could.
So continuing the discussion I started, I'm happy to, because somebody from the UPC should be
Yeah, yeah.
there.
Or
I'm happy
Libby.
to do that.
Peter, what's your availability?
Well, Tom's offering and he's close, or perhaps yourself.
Well, I don't think they're looking for an analysis, they're
Right.
looking for us to just say that we're
In support, yeah,
Okay,
so,
okay.
And I'm closer than,
yeah.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
okay.
so I'm happy to
If
do
he's
it.
willing, I think Tom would be good, or whoever.
I'm good with that.
November 12th, what time?
5 PM.
It's a change from our normal schedule, which would have been the first Monday. But because it's right before Election Day and our clerk's got a lot to do, we're pushing it back.
And then there's Veterans Day,
And then Veterans Day is the next Monday, yeah.
which is back in day too.
So that's a Tuesday?
Tuesday.
Tuesday, November
12th.
12th. Okay.
Yeah.
Correct.
And I don't think we need to vote on your attendance. I think
No.
we just discuss
Part
it.
of the discussion.
Yeah. So, any further discussion on the motion that's on the floor? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0.
I do have a quick question just related to that. Under the I'm not entirely clear about the differential in rates charged under the 5% and exactly how that manifests when we're talking about that.
It's the rates that would be, you would have like a residential rate and you might have a commercial rate.
Yeah, I get that, but if we're voting on 5% and then it turns out to be 5 1/4 for residential, I mean, how,
It's an average
after
rate.
this,
Yeah, that's how we've always kind of brought it forward, it's like an average rate of 5%. Santa could probably, did they leave? They could probably talk to it a little better than any of us, but, yeah, so like one rate might go up 6%, another rate might go up 4%.
but we just describe it as 5.
The overall average is 5, yeah, for the system.
But a consumer could see 6 and
I wouldn't think that it would change,
It's usually not that big of a difference, but that was, yeah.
and typically they're just like last year, they walked us through it. And they said, well, they're substantially consistent, the costs of the system are substantially consistent with the rates of the groups. So they typically don't move between the categories unless there's a big discrepancy. So they'll say commercial really doesn't use this type of infrastructure, therefore their costs would be slightly different. If it's not substantially different, it's just a 5% across.
I think historically, when we look back prior to the contract, you had inside city, outside city was a big difference, and the cost of service to each one of those was kind of what drove what each one's individual rate would be, and that's a very detailed calculation that Stantec puts together.
But now that we have equalized rates,
There
they're,
would be no
For
difference
residential,
between
but you may have
residential
different
in
between
or out.
commercial and residential and industrial.
In
And
terms of communicating with the public, it's hard right now if we're approving 5% and then they see a 5.25 or something.
I mean, that could happen, or you could just approve a 5% and look at their analysis and say, next year, we're gonna tweak it. That works.
so I think what will end up realistically is as soon as we get that cost study from Stantec as far as the different customers, share that with the board, even before the next meeting. So you've got that ahead of time. And then number two, when it does go to the city commission, that will all be detailed out by customer class line item. So that when it's talked about publicly at the city commission level, we've done in the past is the system as a whole will have a 5% increase. And then here's, within the ordinance, it breaks it down by different customer class. So this one might be 4.98%, and this one might be a different one. But that's what the ordinance language does.
So if I'm understanding, you're saying that the city commission will see that on November 12th at the committee of the whole, and then this UPC will see it on the 14th again,
Yeah.
or before, whenever it's available.
Right.
And then, so, and we're not having the special meeting on the 24th.
Libby, I've got great cost of service analysis from 2024 I can share to kind of just give the board some understanding of what that looks like, if that would be helpful.
Any other questions around that, or? Okay. Next item is capital improvements. There are. I thought we voted. Did we vote?
Yeah.
7-0. Capital improvements. I don't believe there are any updates at this time on either of those items. We don't have any information yet from the townships.
I will note that we did, Comstock's meeting on Monday and had a very good conversation on the neighborhood policy, the mandatory connection question. And did not come to a conclusion, but had a very good conversation. I'll download you see, kicked it to the regional commission to talk to the townships about that. And the regional commission had conversations and kicked that to the townships because they're the ones that would have the ordinances to have mandatory connections. So a lot of the same conversations we had here and at the planning committee, the regional commission, and the regional commission we had at the board. So inconclusive as of today, but the conversation continues.
And the townships that are going to have that conversation are Comstock, Kalamazoo Township, Texas,
Richland.
Richland, okay. Thank you. Capital improvement plan. Give me an update on that. We do have one large capital project that we'll discuss under new business. Utility financial policy, that's just looking to see when that's going to the city commission, I believe.
I think we were just looking to bring that kind of with the rates this year, so. in
November 12th, okay. So that'll just be on here until.
Yeah,
then,
we're just
right?
at that point that close enough to do them all at the same time.
New business, quarterly financial review.
So I provided a 6-page document. It is in the same format as provided last year. One page is on the opposite side of the first page. And this is information provided by Mr. Baker. And then I compare it with the prior year information. And the first page is 2024 budget through 9/30 and actual, and then just what percentage of budget has been expended. You need to keep in mind that in the first column, budget, that oftentimes can include capital. The vast majority is in the expenses or expenditures near midway down the page, but there is capital included in the first category. And I really looked at this from the perspective of if we're at 75% of budget or more, it may be a point of interest, and I didn't see any material balances that were in excess of that. Many of the balances are much lower, specifically the capital, and that's because the capital tends to happen in the summer, and the bills are probably flowing in quite well at this point, but not at 9/30. And I did want to take a look at the revenue side, and so I really just focus on that water and sewer system revenue, and we're currently at 78% of budget, which is positive. That's the rates flowing in. The remainder of those categories are typically grant funding or bonding that is expected for budgetary purposes. And the second page is taking a look at what are the balances of revenues and expenses or expenditures, 2024 versus 2023. And I didn't see anything that really stuck out that had a material balance. Many of the categories are actually less than last year, which is great. Keep it up, James. And on the revenue side, you can see our revenue for 2024 is $25.9 million, and where last year it was $23 million. So the rate increase has had an impact, and those dollars are being invested in the system. And the last page is my categorization of the expenditures, 2024 versus 2023, my error in the heading, just to take a look at chemical costs appear to be down. Capital costs less than the prior year, but expected to be greater. Debt service is up, bonding has occurred. I really didn't see anything that, and when I did see lines that grabbed my attention, I go into the detail because you can just click on it and it'll show you every line item. But personally, I didn't see anything that was of great concern that we haven't discussed in this meeting as related to capital or chemical costs or those types of things.
Wages are down a lot.
Some of that, I think, is related to the internal costs of the city, where they may charge, let's say, for environmental activities from the wastewater department to the water department. They've made some changes in like where are they doing billing, where are they doing some of the other cost centers. And again, this is my categorization, just looking at the trial balance and assigning to every account, whether it's wages, capital, what have you.
20% less employees.
Well, it can be that there's not 20% less employees, it's actually they're being charged out of another cost center, and it shows up as those charges that are the city internal charges or what have you. And any questions can be given to Steve or James.
The only thing I'd say about the wages, could be timing too, depending on when payroll's paid. So one payroll could make a 20%-ish difference at this time of year, because we pay 26 payrolls a year, so that's a huge part. Some payroll could go to capital one year and not capital next, depending on where staff are putting their time. So all those things have an effect that really are in the total, and completely in the weeds, so.
I appreciate the summary and the walkthrough. So the last page, those are 7 cost centers that you feel are important to look at?
Yeah, I just,
Focus on?
yeah, basically, because there's so much capital in the previous pages, I just wanted to get a flavor for what's within capital, or what's within this, water maintenance or what have you. So, and this is only the second time we've looked at this last page, but when I was looking at these other pages previously, I was always, well, what's happening with this kind of cost? You can't really tell because it's across every category. So I just did my best to assign wages or these account numbers within their general ledger. These are the capital costs, these are the what have you. And we'll refine this as we go. I think that one of the things that I find helpful is just last year versus this year. First, when you look at budget, there's just so much capital in there and that kind of thing. It makes it a little challenging to understand.
Thank you. I don't think there's no vote on this. Any other questions or comments? Next item is 7B, the proposed approval of the fiscal year 2025 DWSRF project plan in the whole.
I am gonna ask the board to recuse myself from this conversation and the vote, because Brian Newhoff is the firm that put together the project plan on this, and will be doing the engineering work if it moves forward. So it's a direct conflict of interest there, so if it's okay with the board, I'll just sit over here and listen.
Yes, that makes sense. And I'm thinking that applies to B, C, D, and E?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yep.
okay. And then, James, are you introducing this or Brian?
I can introduce it. I do have Brian Villamont from Barney Newhoff here that can provide technical responses on things if we need it. I'm happy to kind of walk through. There's a memo in the report that I can walk through that memo. And then I also have a map that I think would be helpful. I can share that in Zoom if I have permission, which it looks like I do. So with that, just kind of give some background. There are 1,383 public water supplies in the state of Michigan. All public water supplies are eligible to apply for and compete competitively for this funding program, the state revolving loan fund. The city of Kalamazoo system put together a project plan late last year and submitted it. Our final submittal was in May of this year, so it was a process that spanned many months from 23 into 24 when we made that final submittal in 24, including our notification to Eagle back in 23 that we were going to submit. Our submittal included 3 big projects. One of those was a station consolidation and treatment project in the city of Kalamazoo, where we take Station 14 and Station 5, put them together, and then build a new station with iron, manganese, and PFAS removal. That includes a new station-to-station raw water line too, to kind of connect those. The project also includes 1,300 lead service line replacements in Kalamazoo's Edison neighborhood. And then the project also includes extension of public water supply in Richland Township and Ross Township in areas impacted by PFAS. So the whole project plan really focused on improving water quality through treatment, through lead service line replacements, and through the elimination of what we call residential wells. So the map in front of you shows water main extensions in Richland and Ross Township, where there's currently population served by residential wells. So all those projects together create the plan. Plans are scored better when they are inclusive of many different needs of a community. And this project plan really exemplified our overall community needs. I'd like to kind of remind everybody that as a system, those needs, our community needs, may be different across different cities or townships or villages that we serve. So, for example, the map in front of you, Richland and Ross Township, that community need is very different from if I had a map of Edison neighborhood with lead services. There are different project needs for different communities, but the overall need is the same. The overall need is improvements in water quality to benefit the community. This project scored number 2 in the state of Michigan. There was only one project that scored higher than this in terms of overall score and funding. We received a $20 million grant for this and a $90 million low interest loan, which takes that loan over a 40-year period as opposed to a 20 or 25, and then applies a lower rate, 2% instead of 4%. I'll get into some more specifics about that, but I just want to cover the highlights of it. So we spent a lot of time with Mr. Vicinti. We even requested some assistance from Bart Foster, and we requested assistance from Stantec to make some quick decisions so that we could come back to the UPC and provide some recommendations on this project. I will also state that outside of the project funding, we will be under requirement. We're required by EPA to do the station consolidation and treatment work and the lead service line removal work. The public water main extensions in Richland and Ross Townships are not required by any authority. So EGLE or EPA does not require the work that's on the map. That's something that we recommend for the benefit of that community. So if we broke these projects out and we compared them as, I'm going to use the term Project Alternative A and Project Alternative B. If we compared as Project Alternative A, moving forward with the project plan as recommended, or breaking the projects out and doing the lead service line replacement in the city of Kalamazoo and the station consolidation projects in the city of Kalamazoo ourselves, that would actually cost the system more money from a rate perspective. The rate increase needed would be more than doing all these projects together. And the reason for that is the financing. So if we did them ourselves, we don't get to $20 million. If we do them ourselves, we get 20-year and 25-year financing, not 40-year financing. If we do it ourselves, we don't get 2% interest rate, we get 4% interest rate. So when you put those factors in and you look at what is the immediate rate increase to the community to support the project, if doing it ourselves under Project Alternative B would cost ratepayers more money. It would cost, based on that analysis, more than 3% overall, and some really cute impacts that could be as high as 6% immediately just to do the project. We didn't include that work product with this recommendation because as we worked with Stantec on overall rates, those overall rates were actually lower than either one of those alternatives. And we were able to make that lower than either one of those alternatives by smoothing out this DWSRF project. So we know that this is a FY25 project, which means it doesn't even start until 25. Construction is actually gonna occur in 26, and then construction is gonna occur through 29. So in terms of draws and when we actually have to start paying back interest and principal, the full amount of interest and principal payment doesn't come true until 2029. That's the other benefit of DWSRF. When we put that into the overall Stantec rate model, we were able to provide the 5% rate recommendation this year. That's if we move forward with the DWSRF project. We will be required under EPA requirement to have Station 14 and Station 5 meeting 2029 EPA PFAS standards, which they currently do not. So that project would have to go. It was actually, I believe, on Tuesday, President Biden announced that all lead service lines must be replaced within 10 years. That's a brand new announcement that just came out. As a system, we've been ahead of that. We're gonna meet that, no problem. But if we don't do that project under DWSRF, gotta do it ourselves. So essentially what I'm recommending here, based on those analysis, is that it would be less impactful for our ratepayers to move forward with all the projects together in the DWSRF project plan as submitted. So that's kind of the big picture. There's some other, specific action items related to, the UPC has to approve extensions of the public water supply, so that's what's happening here. If we extend the public water supply out into Ross Township, we don't currently have an agreement with Ross Township, we would have to have an agreement with Ross Township, so that language is in there as well. And then, in line with we've done 3 previous projects where we've extended public water supply due to residential well contamination of PFAS. In every one of those projects, we've connected those adjacent property owners at no charge. So essentially, we've, received funding from the state or from other parties to do the project, and then in doing so, we provided that benefit directly to the impacted property owner with a contaminated well. And so that same recommendation is, essentially before you, as well. So there's some dates on there, those dates broadly correspond to, when that project ends and, giving folks some time to react to that. And then it also has a kind of a start date, recognizing that these projects start in 2025. And at some point, we've got to kind of draw the line in terms of, is there a house on this property or not? And if there's not a house on this property now, then your future connection is gonna have to be, on you if you build a house there in the future. I've got an update from Prine and Newhoff that in that whole area, all those extensions, there's 318 parcels, of which there's about 260 homes right now. I think, yesterday, DCM Chamberlain and I were in communication, and I responded that there was 200 to 250 homes. So there's actually, Jeff, there's 260 homes in that area, but it was pretty close. In terms of, where we're at with that. And 318 parcels total, and a lot of those parcels include agriculture, which would not even be, we don't connect to agriculture, so that's kind of an exempt use that wouldn't be considered. So that's kind of my presentation in a nutshell. Obviously, I appreciate there's probably questions, some discussion, and I'll turn it back over to the chair. Thank you.
Libby, I had a chance to take a look at James's analysis and the city team's analysis. I didn't try to recalculate anything. Of not doing the extension component, so A or B, plan A or B, and it made logical sense. The fact that you're receiving this funding at such a discounted rate of 2%, it was really clear when we changed the rates within the model with Stantec by 1% of how big of an impact that has. And in the rate calculation, is this project, is this financing, is this future debt service? It's in the rate right now. So it's not like something new. Also, maybe a point of interest is that state drinking water revolving program is typically federal financial assistance, and dollars that get paid back are used. So when they reimburse you, they'll say X is federal, X is not. So it's likely the result of some of the funding at the federal level to come up with this kind of money for a project. I've audited it before, but never anything near this scope. It's a big project.
One thing I just wanna add, James, you and your team put together a really good application here. Just for everyone's reference, the state had $20 million for emerging contaminants, and we're awarded 100% of that. So that's really a testament to how James and his team put together the application and how the state sees this project for its importance.
Thanks, Steve.
Or how bad it was.
Oh,
Sorry.
I'm trying to put a good spin on
We're
it.
putting a positive spin on it.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right. So anyhow, I
Cer-
like the bundling. I really do.
And certainly the driving thing is the protection of public health. There's also looping that I'm seeing happening from an engineering standpoint,
correct.
which is beneficial. And the 2% is Christmas to me, it's great. So it's 260 homes within this area, is that correct?
That's correct. 260 homes that would be eligible to connect.
And all of those are part of the contaminated area?
Correct. That's a good point. The contaminated area is kind of a broad overlay. We don't have data that's specific to each household because some households didn't request testing, some did, and then the testing occurred over several year period, and the results are variable. We're also seeing highly variable results between different well depths, different soil types. So there is, and we have seen where a house has levels that are above the Michigan MCLs and their neighbor has levels that are below the Michigan MCLs and their next door neighbors. So the contamination is much like KL in some respects in terms of we know where it is and we know where it's moving, but it's not as specific as KL. That's a dioxin plume out there that the signatures are a little bit more defined on some of that contamination. The other challenge that we have with this PFAS contamination plume is that from when we started testing to where we are now and where we're gonna be in 2029, the levels keep changing. So what used to be anything below 70 was safe, those numbers are now gone. We deal with 7 specific contaminants under Michigan MCL. That is gonna change in 2029 when we go to the new EPA requirements. So that's another reason for that kind of timeline, the decision timeline of folks that may not see an immediate need for their family, but as those levels change from EPA, that need may change.
So James, on the agenda, under new business, items B, C, D, and E are all related.
That's correct.
They're all in effect tied bound.
Correct, they're all kind of tied barred together. It's kind of like a package deal, if you will.
And this B is the overarching approval of all three, the recommendation for all three?
Yep.
And this proposed project on the screen, that provides water, will provide water service to all of the contamination?
Correct.
That one, it's hard to see at the scale, the northeast, the closest to Gull Lake there.
I'll see if I can zoom in.
I mean, there isn't a neighborhood within that is my question.
Does that help?
Yeah. I'm not sure what those lines are I'm seeing, must be
So the
parcel
line, all
lines?
the little squiggly lines, that's topographic
Oh, go-
features.
Okay,
So we have Richland, the topo's turned off, so it's just like a flat map. And then Ross, the topo's turned on. That was just done to kind of help show the difference between the boundary. And the boundary line is drawn, but it helps pop it on the map a little bit better.
There's water going all the way, almost down to the lake.
Yeah, it doesn't go, so there's, not all the streets are shown here, but there is like Idlewild, I don't know if you can see that. That is actually those are like lakefront homes, but the water doesn't go that far down. The public water supply doesn't go that far down. That's not to say, so this is the project plan that's submitted, this is the water main extensions that we are proposing to deal with the contamination today. But both Richland and Ross in the future, if Ross becomes a signatory township, then they could extend like any other township, like we've talked about in the neighborhood plans, the neighborhood policy. So, there's a lot of room in the future for Richland to extend. And if Ross becomes a signatory township, there would be a lot of room in the future for Ross to extend. I don't have it in front of me, but it is a public document. It is part of our project plan. There's another map very similar to this that shows potential future phases of Ross Township expansion, should Ross Township decide to expand. And we modeled that. The reason we modeled that was to try to understand if we did this, what's shown on the screen, can the system handle it? And then could the system handle, something beyond that, so that, we could provide Ross Township some better planning and perspective in terms of, in the future, what would that look like? This decision to add a township is, something that would last for hundreds of years into the future. I was looking through the records to see, when did we add Kalamazoo Township? We were adding Kalamazoo Township before we had an agreement with Kalamazoo Township. In 1920, we signed our first agreement with Kalamazoo Township. That was later rescinded, and then we finalized a new agreement with Kalamazoo Township in 1940. And one of the interesting things with Kalamazoo Township in those original extensions dating back from 1920s and even after 1940s is that we extended the main at no cost, but we charged the customer 125%. And that was one of the things that really expanded the Kalamazoo system and kind of really grew our system and pulled our system up to the top of the hill, so to speak. And getting a little into the weeds here, but our system has got all these different pressure districts, and once you get up to the top of the hill, then expansion beyond that becomes a whole lot easier because now you're going downhill. So, growth is something that is centuries into the future, not just the immediate future.
Other questions or comments?
Just a question here. So as far as the extension piece, I know when you have your own well, and maybe even septic system, you're kind of self-contained, there's kind of an independent streak about I can take care of myself. So how, what's the perception as we extend these out in terms of people that are actually interested in hooking up, to a public water system where, I don't know.
Yeah, I can provide perhaps some perspective on very similar work that we've done in Cooper Township and in Richland Township for PFAS contamination. I think with all families, all individuals, every family's different. Each family looks at these situations with their own independent perspective. Some families are, very quick to connect and want to connect. Some families don't want to connect. And so a lot of our previous programs, Cooper, Richland Township in the past, really focus on that voluntary connection at no charge during the project to allow families to make those decisions. We saw, for Cooper's specifically, saw a lot of families that as the construction progressed, they continued to call to request service connections. We also saw during that time period that we had some home sales where the original owner didn't want to connect. But the house was sold to a new owner, and the new owner came during that time when we were still open for connections, and they did want to connect. And so it's hard to say and provide any real data that's going to have any statistical accuracy to it. But broadly speaking, we saw, some pretty large acceptance numbers in Cooper, as the project went on. And I think, I would have to confirm with staff, but I believe we've got, nearly 400 connections now between Richland and Cooper, which is right about where we were at for, total amount of connections. Now, they weren't there day one to sign up on day one. I respected a lot of families need time to understand this, need time to understand, what is city water all about, and seeing it and talking to their neighbors. Success stories will carry. So, neighbors that, yeah, I was connected, good water pressure, water tastes great, the well's off, and hey, I don't have to pay a power bill for the well anymore. So there are success stories, and it can be a very positive experience, for folks that are otherwise dealing with a very stressful situation for their family and their own circumstance.
So just from like a public health perspective, I understand, with PFAS in particular now, having alternatives, just from a economic development perspective, what does this mean, just with that different lens on it, extending this? When you think about the pure numbers of it, when you're replacing, when you're doing work in Edison, you've got to tap every 50 feet on narrow lots, right? Just boom, boom, boom down the street. Linear feet per resident served here, it's probably, by the time you total it all up, I don't know, it's 1,000 feet or something per, household served. I just wonder, from a broader kind of regional economic perspective, if you have any thoughts about what that means, I guess.
Yeah, there's some challenges as you extend the system and become more rural basis. More of your system is gonna be in transmission main. If you look at this map here, the heavy red lines are transmission main. And a lot of the role of those heavy red lines are to get what we had kind of dead ends in Richland, to get those dead ends looped back, extend out into Ross, and then we call bring it back home again. So you can see, if you were to start at the north and, imagine that those heavy red lines were gone, you see a lot of dead ends that kind of just end out in free space in Richland. We almost needed to go into Ross to turn that ship around, so to speak, to bring it back home to Richland. And so, there's a lot of this work is just, improving water quality and extending those transmission lines. The blue lines are what we call distribution, and you see those in Ross. There's like some fingers that go out into a residential neighborhood, and then there's towards the south, there's another finger that goes up. And so those have the high density housing, it's a neighborhood with, residential streets and neighbors. So, it makes a lot of sense there. But as you're out on those transmission mains, then it becomes a little bit more lonely. And that's some of the challenge with, systems as you extend out into rural areas. If we look at zoning for Richland Township, some of those areas would be commercial in the future. M89, for example, is a commercial corridor. Gull Lake Sewer and Water already has sewer on that area. So, some of these in the future may attract some more commercial development that we don't see right now today. And then, the system as it expands out, under Richland and Ross's own independent authority, could spur some more development. But that is a challenge, when we see that in KL, that's a, more of a rural area out in Oshtemo. There are a lot of homes, but most of those homes have bigger lot sizes. Most of those homes are spread out further apart. And so that does become more expensive. If we were to look at, if this, what you see on the screen here, was just straight special assessment, no funding assistance from anything else, you're probably looking at somewhere between $60,000 and $75,000 per parcel to get that on the map. And I'll tell you, it's just not feasible. from no one's gonna sign up for that. It becomes very expensive at that point.
Are those fingers in Ross Township, those are included as, in this project?
That's correct, yep, those blue fingers in Ross Townships are included in this project. There's only transmission main going in Richland Township, but there is distribution going in Ross.
So James, if this was to move forward, you would work quickly to, with Ross to get the signatories of this agreement so we can move forward?
That's correct, yeah, if the UPC were to look at this favorably and approve all of these items, we would be in contact with the state to say, we're moving forward. And, as we move forward, there's gonna be certain checks and balances that have to come back to city commission. But we're, essentially say, yes, we're gonna move forward with this. We would have to move forward pretty quickly with Ross Township. We would need to have that, interlocal agreement, that same agreement that everybody else has signed. It would be that same agreement signed by the city and signed by, Ross. And then, the other aspect of it is that we need to start design engineering. And we need to have, engineers on the street with grade rods and surveys. So we need to get out to the public in Richland and Ross and let them know that the project is, moving forward and, what to expect and that sort of thing as well. So there would be, if approved by the UPC, there would be more public meetings, really focused in Richland and Ross. This is specific to this work. For the work in Kalamazoo, we are kicking off a celebration to talk about lead service line removal in Edison, also to celebrate our 5,000th lead service line replacement. That 1,300 that we're gonna start in Edison is actually funded by FY24 DWSRF. So that's what we're kicking off next Thursday. And so that next conversation on lead, we'll have that conversation, but that's not a new conversation. It won't be a new conversation for Edison. The treatment projects of the stations themselves, those are, that work's gonna occur on city property already. There will be some minor impacts to adjacent property owners and things like that, but, the real focus of the communication for this project would really lie mainly in Richland and Ross Townships.
I guess I have one more question, just not necessarily specific to this. I mean, this is awesome how this is all coming together with the grant and the interest rate and the terms. I mean, it's amazing. Just makes me wonder though, in terms of expansion, I don't think Kalamazoo County does a master plan. I know that all of us at our local levels do master plans. I'm not 100% even sure what the townships do on that, to tell you the truth, but I know that the city has to do a master plan, and update that. We're required to do that, and we project where growth is going to happen and certain kinds of growth, and our master plan might be predicting things that are way ahead of what zoning looks like. Zoning might follow along after the master plan. So in looking at all that, and you look at potential expansion areas and where growth is occurring and where we are predicting it and where master plans are predicting it, how does that overlay fit on, expansion efforts and that sort of thing?
Yeah, sure. Mayor, that's a great question, great point. A lot of that conversation was captured by the parties as they put together that master water agreement. So in that master water agreement, there are requirements for each individual township to submit their master plans and to develop a capital plan that's respective of those master plans. And so that's some of the behind the scenes things that we're working on. I know Tom Weed has excused himself from this conversation, but he's done a lot of great work working with the townships to help build those township capital plans and get those to us at the city, which are also reflected in that big overall capital plan that we talk about all the time. So there are projects happening, not not this project, there's projects happening in our otherwise, normal capital plan that is supporting, growth and need of townships, as they look at, where they want to have their growth. And so that is something that, we are paying attention to. The contract, or master agreement, if you will, does spell out, things that, have to happen with respect to that. And I'll also share with you, DCM Chamberlain and I were able to participate with the Kalamazoo County Board of Public Works, and that's kind of an agency that hasn't really had a lot of need lately, but they may start to get developed. They may start to work with townships on projects to help fund things, and probably mainly in sewer, but we talk about water too. And we had a great meeting with them, we had a great conversation with them. They are looking at, the overall system growth and need of, individual townships, and things like that. And so they came to us with questions of, how does your system grow? How does your system, what is the capacity of your system? Can it handle some of these, growth requests that we've heard in these other townships? And so, from a county level, there is interest and there are folks that are looking at that. And they did reach out to us and we had a great interaction and a great meeting. So I think those are great questions and there's a lot of great folks working on those very same questions to try to put pipe to people in the future when that need occurs.
Appreciate that.
I have a question, it's kind of not really relevant, other than the mandate replacing the water lines in 10 years, is that funded or unfunded by the federal government?
Depends who you ask.
Well, I'm asking James.
Well, I think it's it can be funded if the utility is aggressive enough. And I think, so one of the things that, and I hope everybody can come to the event on the 17th, but if you come to the event on the 17th, you're gonna get a t-shirt. On the back of this t-shirt, I don't know if anybody's ever participated in a sporting, like a 5K or a, Gus Macker was popular some time ago. But usually on the back of those t-shirts, maybe you're in the breakfast 5K for Kellogg's or something. On the back of it, they usually have the sponsors of the race event, right? Well, on the back of our shirt, we've got funding provided by, and we've got the logo of every single township that's part of the agreement. We've got the FFE logo, we've got Eagles logo, we've got the bipartisan infrastructure logo, because these are all funding sources that have helped pay for the lead service line replacement. And Eagle and that funding through state ARP, which we call ARPA, and our federal, the bipartisan infrastructure law, has paid for a large amount of this work. In fact, just our FY24 grant amount, principal forgiveness amount, was something like 8 million. Steve's gonna know the number better than I do.
Yeah, I think it was the full amount of the lead service line.
Yeah, it was like the full amount of the lead service line was completely funded.
So I can kind of jump in on that. Based on
Yeah.
the brief part I've read is the federal government has put aside a couple $1 billion for this, and it looks like it's gonna flow through DWSRF.
So that's
the
the place
same
to
way
get it,
that we've
yeah.
done that, because the state did that with their ARP fundings. They put it through DWSRF. So the past couple of years, I've seen lead service lines covered at or close to 100%. Going forward, probably not gonna happen because their ARP funding runs out at the end of, at least they have to have allocated by the end of this year.
Yeah.
So at some point, that's gonna run out and go back to maybe 10% forgiveness. But then this federal pot, I can guarantee it's not enough, but, being aggressive in DWSRF is gonna help secure that for us.
Yeah, right, so as a utility, we've been very aggressive with our applications for DWSRF, and we've been very successful in getting projects funded.
I'll just add, just to your question, that coming from the township perspective, that the township's requirements to master plan are the same as the city by state law. So.
Got it.
Go through that and integrate the utilities with the zoning and all of that.
Okay, make a motion.
Yes.
I'd move, you do it as a group,
to approve items under new business B, C, D, and E.
As presented.
I support that.
Motion by Jeff Chamberlain, support by Jim Escamilla, to approve items B, C, D, and E as presented. I think that's good. Further discussion, since we're talking about all four of these? I would just add that my understanding is that there are levels of approvals with this. And so the UPC is taking action today. The townships independently will take their own action to approve this. So it will go to Richland's board and it will go to Ross's board, and they will make their own independent decisions on whether to move forward on this or not. And the retail wholesale question is a decision down the road that they'll make, but they have that authority.
It's interesting. Is this going to be fully supported by those boards? Do you have any sense of that?
It's my understanding, and I reached out, there is support. So.
Guess we're,
Any other?
is it roll call or is it just a?
We didn't do this as a resolution. We've not been doing that, so I don't think so.
Okay.
Any other comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. 6-0. 6-0. Thank you. 6-0 and 1 abstention. Good discussion. Next item on the agenda is the professional services.
And I wanted to make a comment on the professional services. I have not provided an invoice for 2 months. I've retired from the audit practice and started a consulting business. And I'm working with James to get a PO so I can submit my invoices. But I wanted you to be aware of it because at one time you were concerned they weren't timely. I know they're not timely, but I'm working with James to get this addressed, and then I'll provide them, I'm hoping, at the next meeting.
And as introduction, there is an invoice from Evan Marsh Bice that came to us with the emailed packet. And then there is an invoice from Prina Newhoff that was in the hard copy packet today. So I think we can take action on both of these independently.
Payment of Evan Mark Vice invoice number 153686, is that right? The amount of $462.50.
There's a motion by David Anderson and second by John Crum to approve the Evan Marsh Vice invoice as presented. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0 and 1 abstention.
I move approval of Prina Newhoff invoice number 84425, $737.30.
Support.
There's a motion by David Anderson, second by John Crum to approve the Prina Newhoff invoice as presented. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0 and 1 abstention. Item number 8, committee member, alternate, attendee guest comments. Anything, I'll start with.
No, I just, Steve Leave?
Yeah.
I was gonna ask you a question. I know he commented on
the water system generating more cash that we've seen in recent years. I just wondered if some of that is credited to the new contract that we're working under, where townships and cities are all, we're together on this, if that had an impact on cash generation.
I think it's more related, I mean, all the participants for sure, but it's also related to those bond covenants and the fact that there's much more bonding occurring.
Oh, okay.
It raises how much you have to fill.
Right,
It's all those pieces together.
right. Thank you.
Ryan? Any comments?
I just have a couple. I appreciate the discussion about Ross Township, and part of my job as a supervisor is to listen to constituents because I'm elected, and I know that the water and the PFAS issue in Ross Township has been very political, very political. The number one thing the residents are concerned about is cost. I think James hit the nail on the head, 60 to 75,000 per parcel. We know when we did the sewer mandate that Ross Township was not eligible for USDA financing. And so that's really a significant burden to put on residents in Ross Township. And so I sit here very grateful to the city of Kalamazoo and to UPC for considering Ross Township joining. There's work to be done. This isn't a slam dunk. Mr. Baker will be coming to our board meeting October 15th to address the full board and to do, a lot of the heavy lifting and information sharing today. But I'm grateful for everyone here. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any comments from anyone online? Non-board member comments?
I have one. Many of you know, I sold my business a year and a half ago, and so I'm finding myself with the ability to travel. And so I've been missing quite a few meetings, and I don't think it's fair for this committee. So I'm stepping down. This will be my last meeting. So I just want to say thank you. I may not have been the best person for this, but because I'm not a civil engineer, I'm a mechanical engineer. But I'm really impressed with this committee and James Baker and his whole team. And I think the city of Kalamazoo and the community is in good hands. So thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Nothing from here.
Well, yeah, as Jim is a city representative, one of the three seats, so he let us know before. And so we're looking at how that seat will be filled. So that will be a recommendation we bring to the city commission. But we also do have two alternates, so we'll make sure we stay as a board fully staffed here with members. Yeah, and just one quick thing, just from the city's perspective of, James mentioned the schedule we have for the rates of going forward. And what we've done a couple years ago was to get the rates approved, or at least presented and ask for approval prior to the end of the calendar year, so that those rates, assuming they're approved, can then become effective January 1st. And that's been helpful to the system for the last couple of years. So that's the track we're on right now, is to get those rates before the city commission and request a decision before the end of the year, which is slightly different than the city's actual budget approval process, because we'll be coming to the city commission after the first of the year in January for the 2025 city budget. So we've worked out that calendar of rates being slightly ahead of the city budget. I think everybody understands that now, and it seems to be working well.
Thank you. I just have two comments, and one is sort of just out of left field, and I don't expect any discussion, but, we are recommending a 5% rate increase, and I know that there is concern among customers for increases, not just in water, but across the board in expenses for living these days. So I just I'm an advocate of monthly billing, and I know that that is a mountain to climb, and I don't expect an answer today, but I just want to say that I advocate that, because for that, I think it helps with some of those issues. And then I just want to say thank you, Jim. I think mechanical engineer is very appropriate here, personally. So.
I was told that this was only be a quarterly meeting.
That's true.
Good job, Dave. So, okay, and our next meeting is November 14th here at 8:30 a.m. And so we will not have the special meeting on the 24th that we discussed. And we are adjourned.
Good job, Libby.
Did you put that?